The dark side of the 1920s. The Roaring Twenties wasn't a period of good times for everyone. The decade also had a dark side. Many Americans were left out of the new prosperity, including many farmers, immigrants, and African Americans. In addition, some Americans became victims of intolerance. Intolerance is an unwillingness or refusal to accept or respect persons of different races or backgrounds or opinions and beliefs different from one's own. The 1920s was also a time when cultural issues divided American society. Many people, especially those in rural areas, were traditionalists. They had deep respect for long-held cultural and religious values. Many other people, particularly those in urban areas, were modernists. They favored new ideas, styles, and social trends. Remember, rural means countryside, and urban is around the city. The Sacco and Vanzetti case. The Sacco and Vanzetti case was one example of the dark side of the 1920s. In 1921, Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti had been found guilty of committing a double murder and robbery and were condemned to die. Sacco and Vanzetti were Italian immigrants in a time of great prejudice against foreigners. The case became very controversial. Many argued that there was no clear evidence tying Sacco and Vanzetti to the murders and suspected they were being tried because they were immigrants who had radical political beliefs. In 1927, the two men were executed. Decades after their executions, doubts remained about their guilt. Modern analysts of the evidence has confirmed that the gun found on Sacco at the time of his arrest was one of the murder weapons. This suggests that Sacco was guilty of the crime, but no one has found proof to link Vanzetti to the murders. The Red Scare. Sacco and Vanzetti supported radicalism, a point of view favoring extreme change in social or economic structures, sometimes through violent revolution. At the end of World War I, American radical groups were not very large or effective. Still, many Americans viewed them with suspicion and alarm, particularly after the success of the communist revolution in Russia. This post-war fear of radicals became known as the Red Scare. Lasting from 1919 to 1920, a campaign launched by the federal government to arrest communists and other radicals who promoted the overthrow of the U.S. government. Red was slang for communist. In 1919 and 1920, federal officials launched a campaign against people they suspected of plotting to overthrow the government. With little or no cause, they arrested 6,000 suspected radicals. During the Red Scare of 1919 to 1920, U.S. Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer allowed what became known as Palmer raids against supposed radicals. Palmer feared a communist conspiracy would overthrow the U.S. government. He believed this threat justified his disregard for civil liberties. Most of the people arrested during the Red Scare were released without being accused of a crime. Nevertheless, the Red Scare trampled civil liberties or basic rights guaranteed to individual citizens by law. Some alleged radicals were deported without a trial. Yet for some Americans, the fear of radicalism overshadowed concerns about abuses of civil liberties. Some 30 states passed laws that made stirring up opposition to the government a crime. Revival of the Ku Klux Klan. Anti-immigrant feelings played a role in the revival of the Ku Klux Klan in 1915. The revived Klan used both political power and mob violence to lash out against African Americans, immigrants, Catholics, Jews, and anyone else it regarded as un-American. In the early 1920s, the Klan swelled to between 3 and 4 million members. Lawmakers supported by the Klan won control of state legislators in Oregon, Oklahoma, Texas, and Indiana. To demonstrate their power, Klan members held massive marches in Washington, D.C. and other major cities. Yet the Klan's violence remained secretive. They often struck at night, wearing hoods that concealed their faces and using whippings, kidnappings, cross burnings, arson, and murder to terrorize entire communities. Although its power had faded by 1930, during the 1920s, the Klan spread terror through many communities, especially in the South. More than 40,000 Ku Klux Klan members marched through the streets of Washington, D.C. in 1925. Because of their large numbers, many members felt safe enough to discard the masks they traditionally wore to hide their identities. Limits on immigration. Other Americans supported less violent forms of intolerance. During the 1920s, Congress limited immigration to the United States. The Immigration Act of 1924 reduced the number of immigrants allowed into the country. The law also reduced immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. Notice the two big drops in this graph. Both show the impact of anti-immigration laws passed by Congress during the 1920s. The second drop shows the effect of the Immigration Act of 1924. Another provision of the new law banned all immigration from Asia. By the end of the 1920s, immigration had shrunk to a little over 1/4 of what it had been in 1921. But even that was not enough of a reduction for many immigration opponents. In 1929, they persuaded Congress to further lower the number of immigrants allowed each year. In 1931, only 97,000 immigrants arrived in the United States, fewer than 1/8 as many as in 1921. Discrimination against Asians and African Americans. Asians and African Americans endured legal, social, and economic forms of discrimination in the 1920s. Asians were barred from becoming citizens, and in several states from owning land. Many states also banned marriages between whites and Asians. African Americans faced continuing discrimination as well. At the end of World War I, returning black soldiers had problems finding jobs. In the South, some black soldiers were attacked and even killed by white mobs. The Scopes Trial. While the 1920s was a decade of change, not everyone had the same views or felt the same way about the changes taking place. American society in the 1920s was deeply divided between traditionalists and modernists. Defenders of traditional morality complained about the behavior of the flaming youth and the flapper. Old-time religion faced off against modern science. The result was a kind of culture war. Traditionalists and modernists clashed over the issue of evolution in a famous court case that fascinated the nation in 1925. It is known as the Scopes Trial. The case began when a teacher named John Scopes was arrested for teaching his class a lesson on evolution. A Tennessee state law passed in 1925 made it illegal for a public school teacher for a public school to teach any theory other than the story of the divine creation of man as taught in the Bible. Sorry, there was a typo here. There we go. The Scopes trial turned into a dramatic contest between traditionalists and modernists. On one side were Christian fundamentalists who believed the Bible was the literal word of God and that God created the universe as described in the Bible. On the other side were modernists who believed in the concept of evolution as developed by British naturalist Charles Darwin. The entire country followed the trial. The jury found Scopes guilty and he paid a fine of $100. The trial was about much more, however, than Scopes breaking the law. It started a debate over teaching evolution in public schools that continues today. John Scopes was a high school teacher who violated a Tennessee state law by teaching Charles Darwin's theory of evolution to his students. His trial became a dramatic contest between traditionalists and modernists that captivated the nation.